Hello, good morning. Welcome to Healthy Happy Families with the Natural Parent. I'm Annaliese Jones, naturopath and medical herbalist, and today this one's for all our pregnant mamas, people wanting to get pregnant, and also that postpartum period. We're talking about iron, depletion, deficiency, and also anemia, and those are the three phases of declining iron that we really want to watch out for. Usually we only hear about anemia, don't we? So introducing you to this concept of depletion and deficiency prior to anemia is super important, because a lot of our mamas fall into that category and really slip through the cracks with their lead maternity carers, and then suddenly in the third trimester we find that they're anemic and they're in that third phase now, and it's almost too late really to get it up to optimal. We can get it up high enough so it's not dangerous for birth, etc., but it's so good to have optimal iron. And honestly, when you're already sleep deprived and baby's arrived and you're breastfeeding, you've got extra drainage on your resources, it really helps for energy and mood as well, and also milk production to have good iron levels. And so it's something I'm really passionate about, and something I find that unfortunately does is just sort of fly under the radar a little bit, because obviously there's so many important things for us to be monitoring and thinking about in pregnancy. So first things first, I always like my preconception care clients to have optimal iron before they actually fall pregnant. That really helps, because it's a little bit tricky to get it up there once we are pregnant, because the body is putting so many resources into baby. But also there's this thing that happens where we increase our blood volume by 50% in pregnancy. 50%, it's huge. And that process is actually called hemodilution. And hemodilution leads to basically more volume, but not, sometimes the body, it's hard for the body to actually keep up with keeping your iron levels up where it needs to be within that. Some people do it okay, so we know that it is normal, we should be doing it, but a lot of women don't do it. And I actually have heard quite often hemodilution as being an excuse for anemia in pregnancy, and that it's actually normal. I don't believe that, because I do see a lot of people actually don't have that problem, and I do think that the body wants us to keep our ratio of iron up to within the ranges that we have decided are healthy. But it's just that for some of us, we either aren't eating enough of the foods that contain high levels of iron, or perhaps we're doing some things that are depleting our iron, or perhaps we didn't start off at optimal levels. There's lots and lots of reasons it can happen. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that you actually need to be your own advocate here, because a lot of times, as I said, there's so much for your lead maternity carer to really be monitoring and thinking about, that getting, consistent blood tests and reading them, appropriately, sometimes just falls through the cracks a little bit. So with your iron, the range here in New Zealand, at least for ferritin, which is what they'll usually test, is between 20 and 250. So that's a pretty huge range, isn't it? Ideally, I like to see people, even in pregnancy, at about 50. So if you're below that, it's time to start thinking, what can I do to increase my iron? Now, what we see is that from your first prenatals to, say, a second trimester blood test, is that often that can drop hugely. And in that second trimester, we're making a lot of extra blood. That's when most of that hemodilution happens. And so we really want to make sure that we're testing in that second trimester. So that's another thing, is sometimes we might have our first prenatals, we might have our blood glucose testing, but just nothing until perhaps late third trimester when it comes to testing iron. So make sure that you do ask for that, and that you keep your eye on that. Gosh, if you start to get below, say, 25 with your iron, then you really need to start supplementing. So you might want to use a vegan or vegetarian form of iron. You might be fine to go for that quite strong dose of ferrogradulate or ferrogradulate with vitamin C that you get from the pharmacy, or you might want to go in between and use some of the ones that I use in clinic, which are a bit gentler, but they're a slightly lower dose. So you just have to weigh up, where your result is, and it is good to get some extra information or, consult a professional around that as well if you're not 100% sure. Actually, there's a lot of extra information in the Motherhood Guide, which is actually available for pre-order on my website. So there's a really in-depth discussion around iron there, and it talks about all the other things that you can measure as well. So what you're looking for mostly is ferritin when you look on your blood test, but you're also looking at serum iron, which they may not test unless you ask. So it's good to ask for that one. And then they're also testing things like iron binding capacity. You'll have other things tested like hemoglobin as well, which will fall under your full blood count or complete blood count, CBC it might be called. So you're looking for all those levels. You don't want to be right on the edge of normal. You actually want to be further in the middle or up towards optimal for that. So go ahead and look at them, get copies, be your own health advocate. And the more you can do to actually make sure that your iron is in the optimal range, the better you're going to feel through your pregnancy. You don't have to be flat on your back through your pregnancy and exhausted and short of breath and all of these things that some women experience with low iron. Obviously, if you're not eating red meat, that's totally fine. There are plant-based foods that you can get red meat from, all your green leafies. Also, if you're vegetarian but still eating some animal protein, there is a little bit in egg yolk as well. But sometimes I do find that in pregnancy we need to supplement if we're not having any red meat. That was me. And so everybody's different and unique. So you just need to make sure that you get a copy, you know where you're at, you know if you need to increase it, and and work away to having optimal levels by due date. All right, if you've got any questions, just flip them through to me, and take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye.